Today we're going to look at something very interesting, and that is magical powers. And it's magical powers that we're going to compare from the magicians of Egypt to Yah's prophets. But first, let's look closely at these important words in the Hebrew to see their true definitions. And we find these words in Exodus 7, verse 11. Then Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers, now the magicians of Egypt. They also did in like manner with their enchantments. I looked at the definition for wise men and it just means cunning. So let's go to the next important word, the sorcerers. So if we go to the Blue Letter Bible, that word for sorcerers is H3784 and it's pronounced kashef, and it means sorcerers, witch, or witchcraft. To practice witchcraft or sorcery. The Strong's definition is a primitive root word properly to whisper a spell, to enchant or practice magic. And if you scroll down, this word for sorcery, it also means to pray, to offer prayers or worship. And it's a word relating to worship, and it's restricted to the worship of idols. And it means to use enchantment, to use magical songs, or to mutter. Now let's look at the word for magician, the magicians of Egypt. And for that, we go to the Blue Letter Bible, and the Hebrew word, the Strong's number is H2748, and the Hebrew word for magician is chertom, and it's a diviner, a magician, astrologer, engraver, writer, only in derivative sense of one possessed of occult knowledge. And the Strong's definition is a horoscopist, as drawing magical lines or circles. It's also an engraver writer only in derived sense of one possessed of occult knowledge, diviner, astrologer, magician, or the bearer of sacred words. Now let's look at the word enchantments. And for that, in the Blue Letter Bible, the Hebrew word is H3858, and it's pronounced lahet, and it means flaming, enchantment, flame of an angelic sword, a blaze. Also from the idea of enwrapping magic as covert, flaming, enchantment. You can see this same word in Genesis 3:2, the flame of the whirling sword. Now that we know the meaning of these Hebrew words, let's start the lesson in Exodus, where Moses and Aaron went before Pharaoh's magicians, and they both did miracles or magic. They both turned staffs into serpents. They both were able to turn water into blood, and they both were able to bring forth frogs. But we're going to focus on something interesting that happens in Exodus 8, verses 17 through 20. So Moses and Aaron did just as Yah had commanded them. When Aaron raised his hand and struck the ground with his staff, gnats infested the entire land, covering the Egyptians and their animals. All the dust in the land of Egypt turned to gnats. Pharaoh's magicians tried to do the same things with their secret arts, but this time they failed, and the gnats covered everyone, people and animals alike. "This is the finger of God," the magicians exclaimed to Pharaoh. But Pharaoh's heart remained hard. He wouldn't listen to them, just as Yah had predicted. So we see here in this example that Moses had more power than Pharaoh's magicians because his power came directly from the true living God, Yah, the creator of heaven and earth. The magicians were relying on occult knowledge, demonic forces, and human trickery, which are always limited compared to Yah's true power. The battle between Moses and the magicians wasn't just who had cooler tricks, it was a spiritual showdown. God was proving to Egypt, Israel, and the world there is no God but Him and no power greater than Him. Exodus 7:5. And the Egyptians shall know that I am Yah. And now let's go to the New Testament that should never have been added to the Torah and break down their word magic. Let's look at and break down their magicians that were right in front of our face this whole time. So for that, we go to Matthew 2, verses 1 through 2. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." Matthew 2, verses 3 through 4. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. And he gathered the chief priests and the scribes of the people together and was asking them, where would the Messiah be born? Matthew 2, verses 5 through 6. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are in no way least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Matthew 2, verses 7 through 8. Then Herod secretly called the Magi and carefully determined from them the time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also." Matthew 2, verses 9 through 10. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. Matthew 2, verse 11. And after they came into the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So now let's begin to dissect and take apart this story of the three wise men, or the three magi, in this story in Matthew. Let's first find out about this King Herod. Herod was an Edomite, or Idumean, by ancestry, descendants of Esau, not Jacob. He rebuilt the second temple in Jerusalem, earning favor with some, but he also built Roman-style cities, pagan temples, and lived a very Hellenized lifestyle, aligning more with the Greco-Roman culture. Now let's find out the definition of these three wise men, or magi, and for that, we will go to the Blue Letter Bible, and that word is Greek, and it's pronounced magos, and it means a wise man or sorcerer. The name given by the Babylonians, Chaldeans, Medes, Persians, and others to the wise men, teachers, priests, physicians, astrologers, seers, interpreters of dreams, augurs, soothsayers, and sorcerers, etc., or a false prophet and sorcerer. So we see here that these three wise men, or magi, were magicians, false prophets that were going to worship some child. To find him, they were going to follow a star because they were astrologers. These magicians were not sent by the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This star and this child had nothing to do with Yah. Yah would have sent prophets, not magicians. And to see that, we go to Amos 3, verse 7. Certainly the Almighty Yah doesn't do anything unless he first reveals his secret to his servants, the prophets. He also warns us in the Torah about magicians and sorcerers in Deuteronomy 18, verses 10 through 12. There shall not be found among you anyone who practices divination, tells fortunes, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, casts spells, or consults the dead, for whoever does these things is detestable to Yah. Now in this story of the three wise men, let's look at the word here for King of the Jews. So for that, we go to the Blue Letter Bible to look closely at the word Jew, and in the Greek that's pronounced Iudaios, and it means Jew, of Judea, Jewess. The usage is Jewish, belonging to the Jewish nation, or Jewish as respects to birth, origin, or religion. But that's very interesting because the children of Israel did not have a religion. They had a covenant with Yah. And all the children of Israel were not Jewish. They had tribes. One of the tribes was the tribe of Judah. So if this child was born and he was king of the children of Israel, or king in the line of Judah, it would have said king of the Yahudim, or king of the Hebrew Israelites. So let's compare the definition of Jewish to the Yahudim in Hebrew. And in the Blue Letter Bible, that word Yehuda for Judah is H3063, and it's pronounced Yahuda. The word means praised, and it also is the son of Jacob by Leah, the tribe descended from Judah, the son of Jacob, the territory occupied by the tribe of Judah, the kingdom comprised of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, a Levite in Ezra's time. So we see here that this child, King of the Jews, is not the same thing as King of Yehuda. This King of the Jews has nothing to do with the children of Israel. Now let's examine this star that the three wise men or three magi followed. And the word for star in Greek means star, but the important word here is the Eastern star. So we will go to the Blue Letter Bible for the word east, which is describing the star. And that Greek word is Anatole, and it means a rising of the sun and stars. The east, the direction of the sun's rising. A rising light, dawn by implication. The east, day spring. What I see here is these magicians were following sun god worship. And let's see what Yah warns the children of Israel about following these astrologers and pagan magicians. And we find that warning in Jeremiah 10 verse 2. Thus says Yah, do not learn the way of the nations, nor be dismayed at the signs of the heavens, because the nations are dismayed at them. But now let's take a look at this word for worship in the Greek, because why would Herod want to worship this child if he was following the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Because we are not to worship any man according to the Torah. So let's look at that Greek word for worship in the Blue Letter Bible. And that word is pronounced proskuneo, and it means worship, and it means to kiss the hand towards one in tokens of reverence. Among the Orientals, especially the Persians, to fall upon the knees and touch the ground with the forehead as an expression of profound reverence. And in the New Testament, by kneeling or prostration to do homage, shown to men and beings of superior rank like Jewish high priests, to God, to Christ, to heavenly beings, to demons. Now let's compare that definition to the definition of worship in the Hebrew. And that word in the Hebrew is number H7812, and it's pronounced shachah, and it means to worship, bow down, reverence, and it means to bow down, prostrate oneself before superior in homage, before God in worship, before false gods, before angels. Humbly beseech. So that word is different like in the Greek. So now let's look closely at the story to see what these three magicians or three magi brought this child, Jesus, this idol. Let's find out why they brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The ancient Egyptians used gold, frankincense, and myrrh in their temples, and all three held deep spiritual and symbolic value in their religious practices. Gold was considered the flesh of the gods, especially the sun god Ra. They also brought frankincense, and frankincense was burned daily in temples as sacred incense, and it was used during offerings and rituals to honor the gods. And lastly, the three magi or magicians brought myrrh, which is used during offerings and rituals to honor gods, also burned in temples and used to anoint statues of gods. Essential also in mummification. It purified and preserved the body for the afterlife. So now let's summarize what we've learned about this story of the three magi following the star to the birth of their pagan idol, Jesus. So we've learned that King Herod was an Edomite under Roman authority. The three magi were magicians, sorcerers, astrologers, and false prophets. The child that would be king of the Jews did not mean the child was from the tribe of Judah. This word, king of the Jews, belonged to the Jewish nation, a religion. The star that these magicians followed was a rising sun star in the east. The worship they wanted to do was kiss the hand or fall down, forehead to the ground, to show homage to Jewish priests, God, Christ, heavenly beings, and demons. And the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, the gifts they brought this pagan idol Jesus, were objects used in Egyptian temples as offerings and rituals to honor their gods. Now that we're shining light on this idolatry and Egyptian pagan god worship and how they worshiped in their temples with gold, frankincense, and myrrh, let's take a look at one more thing in the New Testament. And we find that in John 12, verse 3. Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. But what exactly is spikenard? The ancient Egyptians did use spikenard, native to the Himalayas, India, and Nepal, although it was considered rare and luxurious. Much like in other ancient cultures, it wasn't as commonly used as local resins like myrrh and frankincense, but it was highly valued, especially for perfume, anointing oils, and sacred rituals. But what we were never taught were that the Egyptians used special oils like myrrh, frankincense, cedar oil, lotus oil, and spikenard to anoint statues of gods and the bodies of the dead. These oils were considered sacred and were part of a priest or priestess's ritual duties. This is why Mary anointed the feet of her God, Jesus, a pagan deity. The Christians always say that Jesus was anointed by oil, and this is what they were referring to. This is much different than how Yah tells the children of Israel to anoint a king. And we find that in Exodus 30, verses 22 through 25. Then Yah said to Moses, "Take also for yourself the finest of spices, of liquid myrrh 500 shekels, and of fragrant cinnamon half as much, 250, and of fragrant cane 250, and of cassia 500, according to the shekel of the sanctuary, and of olive oil a hin. You shall make of these a holy anointing oil, a perfume mixture, the work of a perfumer. It shall be a sacred anointing oil." So we see in these two stories in the New Testament that Jesus was a pagan idol and he was not anointed a king according to the Most High. Matthew 27, verse 37. And they set an inscription over his head, denoting the reason of his execution. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Jeremiah 10:10. But Yah is the true God. He is the living God and the everlasting King.